Marco Dante had not heard his real name in 15 years. He sat in the corner booth of Rosa's diner, the same booth he occupied every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. The vinyl seat had molded to his shape over the months. The window beside him looked out onto a quiet street in a quiet neighborhood, far from the gleaming towers of the city's heart, far from the places where people knew his face. Here, he was just another customer. A man in an expensive suit, perhaps, a businessman who liked his coffee black and his pasta al dente, nothing more. The diner was small, 12 tables, a counter with 6 stools and a kitchen you could see through a window cut into the back wall. The walls were painted cream, though they had yellowed with time and cooking smoke. Black and white photographs hung in simple frames. Old Naples, old New York, places that existed now only in memory. Marco liked it here. The simplicity, the quietness, the way the owner, an elderly man named Giuseppe, nodded at him but never asked questions. The way the other customers minded their own business, lost in their newspapers or their phones or their private thoughts. At 6:15, she appeared. The waitress was new. Marco noticed immediately because noticing was how you stayed alive in his line of work. She was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her uniform was crisp and clean. White apron over a black dress. She moved with the careful efficiency of someone who had done this work before, but who was still learning the layout of this particular restaurant. She approached his table with a pot of coffee in one hand and a menu in the other. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was soft with an accent he could not quite place. "Can I start you with some coffee?" Marco nodded. He always started with coffee. She poured and he watched her hands. They were steady, no tremor, no nervousness. That was good. He did not like nervous people. Nervous people made mistakes. "I'll have the linguine with clams," he said without opening the menu. He always ordered the linguine with clams. "Any appetizer tonight?" she asked. "No." "Thank you." She wrote on her pad, nodded and turned to go. It was then that she paused. She turned back, and for just a moment, her eyes met his. They were dark eyes, intelligent eyes, and in them Marco saw something that made his blood run cold. Recognition. She did not say anything. Not then. She simply walked away, her steps measured and calm, and disappeared through the swinging door into the kitchen. Marco's hand tightened around his coffee cup. Recognition was death. Recognition meant someone knew who he was. Someone had connected the face of the quiet businessman in the corner booth with the face of Marco Dante, the man who controlled half the port, who had 3 judges in his pocket, who could make problems disappear with a single phone call. He had been so careful. He had retired from the public eye 5 years ago, letting his underbosses handle the day-to-day operations. He had moved to this quiet neighborhood, bought a small apartment under a false name, and lived the life of a ghost. He attended no parties. He made no appearances. He existed in the shadows, pulling strings that no one could see. And yet this waitress had looked at him and known something. Marco considered leaving. Simply standing up, placing money on the table, and walking out, never coming back. Finding a new diner, a new routine, a new corner booth in a different part of the city. But running drew attention. And he had not built an empire by running, so he waited. The diner continued its quiet rhythm around him. An elderly couple shared a piece of pie at a table near the window. A young man typed on a laptop at the counter. Giuseppe moved slowly through the dining room, checking on customers, his weathered face creased with a smile that seemed permanent. 10 minutes passed. 15. Then she returned with his linguine. She set the plate before him with care, making sure the edges were clean, that the presentation was perfect. The clams gleamed in their shells. The pasta was coated in a light, buttery sauce that smelled of garlic and the sea. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked. "No," Marco said. He kept his voice level, neutral. "Thank you," she nodded. But she did not leave. Instead, she leaned down just slightly as if to adjust the placement of his water glass. And in a voice so quiet that only he could hear, she whispered 4 words that stopped his heart. "I know who you are." Marco's face did not change. Years of discipline, years of holding power through will and control, kept his expression perfectly neutral. But inside, every alarm was ringing. She straightened, gave him a small, polite smile, and walked away. Marco did not touch his food. His mind was racing, calculating possibilities, assessing threats, planning responses. Who was she? An undercover agent? An ambitious reporter? Someone sent by his enemies to rattle him, to make him slip, to make him reveal himself? Or was it something else entirely? He watched her as she moved through the diner. She took orders. She refilled coffee. She laughed at something Giuseppe said. Everything about her was normal, natural. There was no tension in her shoulders, no quick glances in his direction, no sign that she had just threatened one of the most dangerous men in the city. That, perhaps, was the most unsettling thing of all. After 20 minutes, she returned to his table. "How is everything?" she asked, noting his untouched plate. "Fine," Marco said. Then carefully, quietly, he added, "Perhaps you could explain what you meant." Earlier, she glanced around the diner. No one was paying attention to them. She picked up his water glass, pretending to check if he needed a refill. "Not here," she whispered. "Meet me out back. In 15 minutes. By the dumpsters." Then she was gone again, moving to another table, asking another customer about their meal, being perfectly, unremarkably normal. Marco considered his options. This could be a trap, an ambush. The alley behind the diner would be dark, isolated. Easy to stage an accident, easy to make a body disappear. But if she had wanted him dead, there were simpler ways. A poisoned meal. A tip to the police. A whisper to his rivals. No, this was something else. And Marco had not survived this long by being a coward. He stood, placed two $50 bills on the table, and walked toward the restroom hallway. At the end of the hall was a back door marked, "Staff Only." He pushed it open and stepped into the cool evening air. The alley was narrow and dark, lit only by a single bulb above the back door. The dumpsters smelled of old food and rotting produce. In the distance, traffic hummed on the main road, but here everything was quiet. Marco waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then the door opened and she stepped out. She no longer wore her apron. She stood before him in her simple black dress, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression unreadable. "You came," she said. "You gave me little choice," Marco replied. "Who are you?" "My name is Sofia," she said. Sofia Castellano. The name meant nothing to him. He watched her carefully, waiting. "You don't remember," she said. It was not a question. "I didn't think you would. It was a long time ago. And you were busy?" "Explain," Marco said. His voice was hard now, sharp. The voice he used in boardrooms and basement meetings. Sofia took a breath. 20 years ago, you were not yet the man you are now. You were younger, working your way up. You had just taken control of the East Side operations. You were consolidating power, making examples. Marco said nothing, but he remembered. Those had been brutal years. Necessary years. There was a man, Sofia continued. His name was Antonio Castellano. He worked for you, a driver, low-level, reliable. He had a wife and a daughter. Something shifted in Marco's memory. A ghost of recognition? "One of your shipments was intercepted," Sofia said. "The police found it. Someone had talked. You needed to know who. So you questioned everyone who had been near that shipment. Antonio was one of them." "I questioned many people," Marco said quietly. "Yes," Sofia agreed. "But you let him go. You believed him when he said he hadn't talked. Your lieutenants wanted to kill him anyway, just to be safe. But you said no. You said he had a family. You said his eyes were honest. You let him live." The memory was clearer now. A nervous man in a basement, sweating, terrified, but telling the truth. Marco had learned to read people, to see when they were lying and when they were not. The man had been innocent. "That man was my father," Sofia said. Silence filled the alley. Marco stared at the young woman before him, seeing her now not as a threat, but as something else entirely. An echo, a ghost from decisions made long ago. "He came home that night," Sofia continued. Her voice was soft but steady. "He was shaking, crying. He told my mother that he had been sure he would die. But you had spared him. He said you were the only man in that room who had seen him as human. He worked for me for 5 more years," Marco said. The memory fully returned now. "He was killed in a car accident. I sent flowers to the funeral." "Yes," Sofia said. "I was 10 years old. I watched them lower his casket into the ground, and I remembered the story he told. About the man who spared him. About Marco Dante. She took a step closer. You gave my father 5 more years of life, she said. 5 years to watch me grow. To teach me things. To be my father. Because of you, I have memories I would not otherwise have. Birthdays, Christmases. A father who tucked me in at night and told me stories. Why tell me this now? Marco asked. Why reveal that you know who I am? Sofia smiled, and it was a sad smile, filled with old pain and older gratitude. Because I saw you sitting there, she said, week after week, alone in that corner booth. And I recognized your face from an old photograph my father kept. And I thought, you should know. You should know that your mercy mattered, that it echoed forward in time, that somewhere in this city there is a woman who exists because you chose kindness when you did not have to. Marco found that he had no words. In his world, mercy was weakness. Kindness was a liability. He had built an empire on fear and respect and calculated violence. He had made hard choices. He had done terrible things. He had long ago accepted that when his time came, there would be no one to mourn him, no one to say his name with anything but hatred or fear. And yet here was this woman, this waitress, speaking to him of gratitude, of memory, of kindness. I don't want anything from you, Sofia said, as if reading his thoughts. I'm not here to blackmail you. I won't tell anyone who you are. Your secret is safe. I needed you to know. That's all. She turned to go back inside. Wait, Marco said. She paused, looking back at him. Your father, Marco said. Antonio. He was a good man, an honest man. I'm glad I let him live. Sofia's eyes shimmered just for a moment. Then she nodded. So am I, she said. And then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. Marco stood alone in the alley for a long time. The night air was cool on his face. Somewhere a cat yowled. A car passed on the street beyond. The city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to the small moment that had just occurred in a forgotten alley behind a forgotten diner. Finally, he walked back inside. The diner was still quiet, still peaceful. Giuseppe was wiping down the counter. The elderly couple had left. The young man was still typing at his laptop, lost in his own world. Marco returned to his corner booth. Sofia appeared a moment later with a fresh pot of coffee. Your linguine got cold, she said. Let me bring you a new plate. On the house. Thank you, Marco said. She poured his coffee and their eyes met for just a moment. There was an understanding there, a shared secret, a small bridge built across the vast distance between two very different lives. Sofia, Marco said quietly as she turned to go. Yes? You have your father's eyes. He was right. They are honest, she smiled, a real smile this time reaching her eyes. Thank you, she said. That means more than you know. And then she was gone, moving through the diner, being normal, being invisible, being a waitress who served coffee and pasta and asked how everything was. Marco sat in his corner booth and looked out the window at the quiet street. He thought about the years behind him. The choices he had made, the blood on his hands, the empire he had built. He had never been a good man. He knew that. He had done things that could never be forgiven, never be undone. But once, 20 years ago, he had looked at a terrified driver and seen a father. And he had let him live. One moment of mercy in a lifetime of calculated cruelty, and it had mattered. Somewhere, somehow, it had mattered. Epilogue. Tuesday evenings. Marco continued to visit Rosa's diner every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. He sat in his corner booth. He ordered his linguine with clams. He drank his black coffee and watched the quiet street, and Sofia served him always with a small smile, always with that shared understanding between them. They rarely spoke beyond the necessary exchanges of customer and waitress. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the diner was nearly empty, she would refill his coffee and mention something small, a memory of her father, a story from her childhood, a moment she wanted to share with the man who had made those moments possible. And Marco would listen. He was still Marco Dante, still the man who controlled empires from the shadows, still dangerous, still untouchable. But on Tuesday evenings in a small diner far from the towers of power, he was also just a man who had once made the right choice. and who was reminded week after week that even in the darkness, even in a life built on fear and control, one moment of humanity could echo forward through time. One name whispered in kindness could mean everything. The city continued its endless dance of light and shadow around them. But in that corner booth for 1 hour each week there was something like peace, and for Marco Dante that was enough.